Hi guys, Olive here today to talk to you about the books that I read in February 2020. But before I do that, I very briefly want to mention a book I read a couple of months back. I had a review of this book due to run in my city's newspaper, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and I wanted to hold off on discussing that book until that review ran. But now that it has, I did want to briefly mention it. That book is called The Dead Girls Club by Damian Angelica Walters. To sum this book up very quickly, this book follows a child psychologist named Heather living in modern-day Baltimore. One day, out of the blue, she receives something disturbing in the mail. It is one half of a best friend heart necklace that she shared with her best friend back in the 90s. Now, this wouldn't necessarily be disturbing to any of us, but it's disturbing to Heather for two big reasons. The first being that the package is unsigned. And the second is she tells us pretty much immediately in the book that she killed her best friend back in the 90s. The whole book then follows Heather as she's trying to figure out who may know about her childhood crime when she previously thought it was her secret and her secret alone. But she's getting a stronger and stronger suspicion as the book goes on that someone is onto her. Now, I won't say this is the best thriller I've ever read in my life. I've certainly read better, but I did really like, of course, the 90s nostalgia elements. And I also really liked how it was set alongside these blasé suburban normalcies. I found it gave it a very sinister vibe, and I really dug that. Of course, if you would like to hear more about this book, I will post a link to my very first Post-Gazette review down in the description box below. You may know if you've been watching these wrap-ups for a while, I've been working hard on written reviews, specifically for open letters, for over a year now. And I always had an idea that I would like to try to break into freelance reviewing, but for me, there was no other option of first venue than my city's newspaper. My city means the world to me. I love living here. I have so much pride for this city. To have my name in print in the Post-Gazettes, I'm going to stop talking about it. It's going to make me emotional. It really means a lot to me. So I'm very, very thankful. But let's move on to talk about books I actually finished in February. The first one of those is one that I will call Buy Yourself the Lilies for the purposes of this video. I know some people watch BookTube with their kids in the room. I have to say, even though I am not at all afraid of swear words, which you will know if you've ever seen my blooper reel, I am so beyond tired of seeing them in book titles. That was a novelty back in 2015 or 2016, but since that point, a few self-help books with those types of titles have really hit it big. So the publishing industry is doing their typical thing of, ooh, that was successful. Let's make 1 million books with titles like that because that won't get tired at all. So yes, this is Buy Yourself the Lilies by Tara Schuster. I did not request this one on NetGalley. I just kind of received it. It just all of a sudden appeared to my fellow NetGalley reviewers. Did this happen to anybody else? Is it just me? Bueller? Even though I'm a lover of nonfiction, I tend to not like self-help books, to be completely honest. I normally find them a little bit preachy, so I was hesitant to dip into this one, but I do have to say that I was mainly pleasantly surprised by this book. The whole premise of this book is that many of us during our childhoods don't get everything we need from our parents mainly to become whole functioning humans. And that there will be areas of all of our lives, some more than others, where we need to effectively reparent ourselves when we come of age. A lot of the book actually functions as a memoir where she's taking us through periods of her upbringing and her young adulthood. She's talking about things that she wasn't taught back then, but what she has learned since, and what methods she's using currently to get herself on the best path. I did like a lot of her tips, and I liked the tone to her book. It was very, I'm in it with you, because she's sharing so much of her own personal experiences. I liked the way she talked about journaling first thing in the day to get all of those thoughts that are just caught up in your head down on paper so they're not haunting you throughout the entire day. And in a similar vein, she talks about ways in which you can improve the way you talk to yourself to be less critical of yourself. Those are definitely things that I want to and need to implement. But I do think she took on a bit too much in this book. She talks about pretty much every aspect of your life you can think of. So careers, money, relationships, exercise, pretty much everything, which on one hand means that there is probably something in here for everyone. But because none of us, I think anyway, are looking to overhaul every single thing about our lives, you will probably end up skipping chapters if you pick this up, which I think will play into whether or not you think it's worth your money. And then I have one more big gripe with this book, and that is in the exact same paragraph, one line could have a beautifully worded observation, something that would quite literally take my breath away. And then on the very next line, she's using Twitter slang. I'm going to be completely honest with you here. I'm obviously a millennial, okay? I have a Twitter account. I know what she means when she's using it. It's not a, I don't understand it and therefore I don't like it kind of thing. I just think it doesn't belong in a book, especially just sprinkled in amongst everything else. I don't think it's cute. I don't think it makes you more relatable. I think it makes you look like you don't know what you're doing. Save it for Twitter. So yeah, it's a decently executed self-help book. There's good stuff in here. I just wish it wouldn't have gotten in its own way so much. Next up was a book sent to me by Avery Books. That book is called Death is But a Dream, Finding Hope and Meaning at Life's End by Christopher Kerr. This is a book all about the very well documented but far less well understood phenomenon of pre-death dreams. Often right before a person is going to pass away, they start to have these dreams. And they normally involve someone from the person's past who has died before them. They normally include some significant moments from the person's past or some sort of mashup thereof, things of that nature. The author of this book is a physician at a hospice facility, and he was noticing that his patients were reporting these very similar types of dreams. But when he went to go find more information about them, he really couldn't find much. There haven't been very many studies conducted about these types of dreams, partially because doctors are far more interested in life-saving procedures, studying things that can save people's lives versus provide comfort at the end of life. A lot of what we previously knew about pre-death dreams before Christopher Kerr decided to undertake his series of studies came from secondhand sources, from people who were just in the room with the dying person. It never actually came from the person themselves. So he decided that his research was going to be extremely patient-focused. By that point in the book, you learn that that's very in character for Christopher Kerr, because the whole reason why he transitioned to working in hospice when he previously was just a regular doctor was that he felt that doctors had lost a lot of that patient focus. They were so much more focused on fighting disease than providing comfort to patients. It very much is an extension of the conversation had in Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, one of my favorite nonfiction books. This book is predominantly made up of his patient stories. We get to learn what their lives were like. We find out how they first became sick. We hear how they describe their dreams. And ultimately, we learn what service those dreams provided them. It very much seems like these pre-death dreams are the brain's way of finding closure at life's end, and that's going to mean something different for everyone. If you liked Being Mortal or When Breath Becomes Air, then this needs to be the next book you pick up, because it felt so much like a natural extension of that exact same conversation. It is so full of heart, wisdom, and empathy, and it brought this robot to tears on more than one occasion. Then I buddy read The Dinosaur Artist by Paige Williams with the lovely Emma over at A Cup of Books. This is one of those natural history true crime books that I've been really digging lately. This one surrounds the sale of a T-Rex, or more specifically its cousin, the T-Batar skeleton, both how it came to be up for sale and also how the Mongolian government ended up intervening. This book is an expanded version of an article that this author wrote for The New Yorker, and like most authors of this style of book do, she includes a lot of information that's somehow connected to the central crime. So in here you have a lot of information about Mongolia in general, Mongolian history. You get the history of fossil hunting. You get to learn about a few previous big sales of fossils. But unfortunately, I found anyway that there wasn't enough meat on the bone of the central story, pardon the pun, to warrant an entire book about it. I thought a New Yorker article would suit this story just fine. Oftentimes the side information was far more interesting than the central story, and we would get a few chapters of that connected information, and I would completely forget where we were in that main saga, and I wasn't really interested in coming back to it, to be honest. So this was an interesting one for sure, and definitely a ton of fun to read alongside a dinosaur lover like Emma, but not the best example of this subgenre. A much better example of that exact same subgenre is another one I picked up this month. That book is called The Falcon Thief by Joshua Hammer. The central crime at the heart of this story is when a man was apprehended at a British airport, and he was found to have peregrine falcon eggs taped to his stomach. It turns out that this man was a very well-known egg thief, and had been so since his childhood, the author tells us, since he gives us his entire backstory. And what he was attempting to do in this airport was smuggle these eggs and the birds that they would become to the Middle East because moneyed elites in the Middle East collect these falcons and race them. And for several different reasons, they're under the impression that wild birds are inherently superior to those bred in captivity. This book goes into the whole black market for these eggs. It talks about the work of wildlife crime detectives. Yes, that is a real job. And it talks about this egg thief's many exploits, if you will, because this was not the first crime or the last that he committed. He is such an entitled, frustrating person, and yet is entirely charming and will get you to like him. And his relationship with the main wildlife crime detective in this book was very catch me if you can. I thought this book was crazy, but it was extremely well done. I wrote a whole review of it for Open Letters, and I will link that for you down below if you'd like to hear more about it. And then, since it was February, I had to throw a romance book in there. I ended up picking up the second book in the Reluctant Royal series. That book was called A Duke by Default by Alyssa Cole. This book follows the best friend of the main character from the previous book. Her name is Portia, and right at the beginning of the book, she is headed off to Scotland to undertake an apprenticeship in sword making. But immediately when she arrives, she ends up macing, pepper spray, her new boss, Tavish, right in the face, and then hits herself also in the process. The two aren't on the best terms after that fact, but right as the ice begins to thaw, Portia discovers something about Tavish's identity, and it adds a whole layer of complexity to their relationship. I may have loved this book even more than I loved the first in the series, and I love that one a whole lot. There is so much depth to Portia's character. We find out why she wanted to take this apprenticeship in the first place. We see her start to confront some of her inner demons about not feeling good enough, not feeling like she measures up to her sister. So lots of good character growth, a really fun romance, and smart writing the entire way through. I might not be able to wait a whole year to pick up the third in the series. The penultimate book in this wrap-up unfortunately doubles as my most disappointing read of the month. That was The Truants by Kate Weinberg. This book was just released back in January, and I really wanted to pick it up as soon as possible because it was marketed as a secret history-esque campus novel. I eat those types of books up, so when this became available at my library, I jumped at my chance, and I'm kind of regretting that I did. This book is about a first-year literature student who picks one university in particular so that she can study under a charismatic professor. Are you starting to understand the secret history comparisons? But once she gets there, she ends up bonding with her roommates and then starts to develop a little bit of a thing for her roommate's journalist boyfriend. But for a campus novel, there's very little campusy or nerdy things to it. It's mainly about the dynamics between the characters and how we're finding out that some people aren't who we thought they were. Honestly, even having finished this book fairly recently, I'm struggling to find ways to talk about it because there just really wasn't much to it. There weren't any good tense moments, and the least interesting character was the main character, which is a huge pet peeve of mine. No vanilla main characters. This was one of those books where I felt like I was waiting for the real story to start when it ended. Not one I'd recommend in the slightest. But the final book I'd like to talk to you about in this wrap-up is one that I surprisingly enjoyed a great deal. That book is called Una Out of Order by Margarita Montemor. This is one of those books that sprinkles a single sci-fi element into an otherwise just straight contemporary story. Beginning on her 19th birthday, which also doubles as New Year's Day, the main character of this book, Una, of course, travels to an entirely different year of her life. She is mentally the same age, but she will live in the body of an older or younger version of herself in the year that she would be physically that age until the next year when it'll happen all over again. This obviously creates some bumps in the road, but some advantages as well. Money is never going to be a concern for her since she effectively has a cheat sheet for the stock markets, but also maintaining relationships with people is going to be next to impossible considering she'll be rocketed to a different decade right as things are heating up. I was skeptical of this book at first. I will fully admit that to you. I did not initially like the idea of giving Una this condition without explaining why it happens. It never promises you an explanation and it never gives you one. It tells you that right up front. and I wasn't quite sure how the author was going to handle it, but I was really pleasantly surprised by this. It is a fully realized novel. You can certainly say that she oversimplifies the time travel element to it, but by doing so, she can use it as a plot device. I didn't love everything about it, but I thought it had an extremely tight story. It was really fun to read. It had both touching and funny moments. Macmillan actually sent me both this physical copy and an early audio copy of it. So if you're into audiobooks, I can tell you that the audio version is really good as well. If you'd like to hear more about this book, I wrote a full review of it for Open Letters, and I will link that for you down in the description box below. So those are all the books I managed to get through in February. I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books, if you've heard of any of them, or if you're now interested in reading them after hearing me talk about them. You can put that or any other comments or questions you may have down in the comment section below. But if you would prefer to find me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles are in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.